Welcome to the 31st episode of the Tertius Times podcast. Today is Monday, October 2nd, 2021. I'm your host, Brian Wright, and today we will look at a Christianity Today report on religious persecution worldwide. There is no interview segment for this week, but I am in communication with someone who has done enormous work on behalf of the persecuted church. God willing, that interview will be available soon. This Wednesday, October 6th, USCIRF will present an update on at-risk religious communities in Afghanistan. I attended the previous USCIRF hearing, Strategies for Religious Freedom in Fragile States, and found it very informative. I would encourage you to attend this upcoming event as well. I will announce this again at the end of the podcast. Quote, government restrictions on religion are at a global high, unquote. According to Pew, religious terrorism at record low, government persecution at record high. September 30th, 2021, from Christianity Today. Quote, social hostility toward religion, however, unquote, it continues, quote, is at its lowest level worldwide since ISIS. As of 2019, the latest data available. The report began tracking these statistics in 2007. Out of 198 nations surveyed, 180 had at least one recorded, quote, government harassment of religious groups, unquote, while 163 also experienced, quote, government interference in worship, unquote, and, quote, nearly half, 48%, of all nations use force against religious groups, unquote. As mentioned earlier this week, China and Myanmar led the pack of the latter, along with Sudan and Syria. The article also reported that, quote, social hostilities toward religion are down from 53 nations the prior year and a peak of 65 nations in 2012. Meanwhile, Pew's global median score declined from 2.0 to 1.7, its lowest level since 2014, unquote, partly due to an overall increase in religion-related terrorism, down to 49 countries from 64 in 2018. The high was 82 in 2014. Very high levels went down from 10 countries to 8. However, 28 nations saw an increase in such violence. Sri Lanka, due to the Easter attacks that killed 250 and injured 500, and Afghanistan, due to Taliban brutality, were top of the list. Reactions against proselytism, mob violence, and dominant religion enforcement all decreased as well. Bolivia, however, was cited as an exemption as a result of its expelling Protestant missionaries, which it had not done in the past. Egypt was mentioned as well for its oppression of Christians, but it also saw an overall decrease of social hostilities from very high to high. However, quote, fewer countries had limits on proselytizing and on foreign missionaries. On both metrics, 77 nations in 2019, down from 81 in 2018. And there were fewer reports of countries denouncing religious groups as cults or sects. 26 nations in 2019, down from 30 in 2018, unquote. There was also a decrease in countries with very high scores, 26 to 23. New categories tracked are, quote, online restrictions, unquote, which included 28 nations, half from the Middle East and North Africa, and surveillance, with 60% of countries on the list from the Asia-Pacific region. Examples included, quote, the United Arab Emirates blocked online testimonies from Muslim converts to Christianity, unquote, and Chinese, quote, authorities use facial recognition technology to monitor and collect biometric data on Uyghur Muslims and other groups deemed to be political threats, unquote. The article adds that, quote, Christians and Muslims remain the religious groups receiving harassment most widely. The number of nations harassing Christians increased from 145 to 153, while the nations harassing Muslims increased from 139 to 147. Jews, harassed in 89 nations, up from 88, were the only group to receive more pressure from society than from government, unquote. Baha'is, Sikhs, and Zoroastrians were harassed in 68 nations, folk religions in 32, Buddhists in 25, Hindus in 21, and, quote, atheists, agnostics, and humanists, unquote, in 22. Property damage, physical assaults, detentions, killings, and displacement were categorized by Pew as, quote, force or violence violations, unquote. The Middle East and North Africa again led the list. Europe, Asia Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Americas, respectively, rounded out the list. Europe's increase was due in part to the destruction of a Jewish cemetery in Denmark, quote, on the anniversary of a 1938 pogrom. The combined impact of these categories were highest in Egypt, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Russia, while Japan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Africa, Italy, and the US were lowest. China, Iran, and Indonesia also were high, based just on government restrictions. However, for social hostility, China, along with Japan, were lowest, while the US with Italy and Iran were ranked moderate. Although not speculated in the article, it would seem highly likely the numbers during this pandemic, due to widespread governmental restrictions, would also see a rise in religious interference. The full Pew report is available online. The link is in the description. Pray for the world, thanking God for the decreases in violence of citizens against citizens, and that social harassment of people of differing faiths or opinions continues to decrease, and that governments change from increasing oppression and repression against its own to an increase in tolerance and full acceptance of others who believe differently or express contrary viewpoints. Pray that all people are unshackled from accepting the truth. I want to briefly announce again this valuable free online event by USCIRF, update on at-risk religious communities in Afghanistan, and encourage all listening to attend. I also want to remind everyone that the previous event, USCIRF Hearings Strategies for Religious Freedom in Fragile States, has been posted on YouTube. The links are in the description. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here useful and that it encouraged you to pray for these people in areas of concern, and perhaps even inspires you to take positive steps of involvement to alleviate the suffering of so many around the globe. Continue to pray for those mentioned today as you are led. Finally, pray with me that God's peace, eternally beyond our comprehension, will guard the lives of all who follow Christ and flow outward to bring that peace to all the world.